Welcome to our user group webinar, everybody. My name is Jim. I'm coming to you live on a clear and cool day here in Columbus, Ohio. I'm so glad that you were able to join me here today, where for the next 20 minutes, we're going to be spending time talking about um, report options in the donations module. We're not going to be spending too much specific time talking about the output of one particular report. We're going to be talking about the way in which all of the donations report can be edited and modified in sort of a general way. So it's just about report options for the donations module. Before we get started on that, on your screen, you're going to have a GoToWebinar control panel that you have access to. The most important thing there is the little red arrow button that you have that you can click to minimize that control panel to give you a little bit more room to see your screen, or to maximize that control panel so that you have access to the different features on that, which will give you access most importantly to the questions section. Like I said, I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about the report options in the donations module. So if you have questions about that topic, feel free to go ahead and type them into that questions section. I will be able to get to them after I'm finished with my presentation. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about that. I'm going to go ahead and start. We're using version 19.16.1, which is the current version of our program right now. And I'm going to go ahead and launch the donations module. From here in the donations module, you navigate around by using the different tabs along the top. I'm going to go to the reports/export tab here. And the first example report I'm going to use is going to be the donations log report. Now, these are general options that are going to be on a lot of these different reports. So when I open the donations log report, this is more of a transactional style report that gives you individual gifts, lists of individual gifts. Most of these reports, I think all of these reports, when you first open them up, it's going to take you to the tab along the top here that says filter. And all of these reports are going to have a series of different tabs along the top. They're going to be different based upon which report we're looking at, but most of them are going to start up on some kind of tab that says filter there. On specifically the donations log report, we've got a number of options that we can run through on here. When you print this by default, if I just open this screen and I click print, it's going to be a rather long report. We got 20 pages of a report showing all of our gifts from all of our individuals here in the 2016 year. So you're going to see all of these gifts, individual transactions listed on your screen here. But on the filter tab is where you can limit and control the output of that report. So what transactions are going to appear on that report is what you set here. So you start in the upper left-hand corner where it says giver. This is a search box, so you can type in a particular person's name and it will locate them. Hit the enter key, you'll see that giver listed under there. If you were to print the report now, you'll see just the gifts from that one individual. Okay. So the giver section is where you're going to go to look at only gifts from one particular individual. When you have an individual selected here along the top, you can also limit your report to any campaign or pledge that that person is participating in. So when you do select an individual at the top, you're going to be able to click on the down arrow for the pledge, and you'll see all of the pledges that they have participated in and the date ranges that those pledges have gone over. So you simply select one of those, click your print button, and then you'll only see the gifts to that one particular campaign or pledge. It's just ways to filter more and more sort of which gifts are going to show up on your report. The next line that you see on here is account. This one, you click on your down arrow, and any of the giving accounts that you have set up in the donations module, you can select from them. If I only want to see gifts to the building fund, I select that. Click my print button. Again, it's going to filter it. In this case, we don't have any. Let me go ahead and find one I'm sure we've got some for, the general fund. Now we're only going to be listing the general fund. We'll talk about how to control the specific output of the report when we're talking about the columns tab, but you'll see we have an account column. These will all be for the general fund that you see listed on here. Okay. And then from there, it's just different ways to look for particular transactions from there. So if you have a particular check number you need to look up, you can do that here. I don't think my trading book matches our data. It does. So check number 1346. So there's that. We have several from several givers here. That's an odd coincidence. So yeah, so it'll show just transactions with that particular check number. Okay. Below that is where it says user. The Church Windows does audit data entry by user. So if you do have usernames and passwords set up in your program, you can come in here and type in the user name for the person who was logged into Church Windows, and then you can display transactions that were entered by that particular user. So like if you hired a brand new secretary or a new data entry volunteer came in, you could take a look at specific things that that person had entered into the system by using that user section right there. Below that, we're looking at batch codes. I should be highlighting these, I think. Below that, we're looking at batch codes. Batch codes are in Church Windows to give you the ability to report on batches that have the same date separately. So if I click on my down arrow, you'll see some examples. The most common example would be for if you have multiple services on the same day. If you have a morning and a afternoon service, or in this case, we've got a 9 a.m. service and a 10:30 a.m. service on Sunday, this will allow you to report on just that particular batch separately. So you would use, oftentimes, you'd use the batch code in conjunction with the date occurred, which we're going to talk about in a moment, to look at one particular batch in your system. Okay. Giver number range. If you do use envelope numbers or giver numbers, this lets you look at a particular range of those gifts. If your members are giver numbers 1 through 200, for example, you can limit it just to that one particular group of people, and it will only print folks with those particular giver numbers. Okay, date occurred and date posted are the next two here. The difference between date occurred and date posted is that date posted, which is the second of these, is the date that somebody sat in their chair in front of the computer and did all of this data entry. The date occurred is the date that you record the gifts to. So commonly you're going to see the date occurred will have Sunday's date, which is the day that you had your service and collected all of your donations. And then date posted for that same batch would be Monday or Tuesday of next week. So it's a difference between the date that you entered in the system and the date that you actually sat there and recorded your giving. So if you wanted to limit it to just like Sunday's batch, for example, you could do that here. I'm not entirely sure if we've got data for this date, but if you wanted to limit it to one particular date, that's not going to work. I know we have data earlier in the year. Let's do February 7th through February 7th. You can also type in here. You don't have to use those calendars as well. and then it will limit it just to that one particular date. We had a big one gift on that day. This is training data. Sometimes it acts a little strangely there, but okay, so that's date occurred. Also, transaction number is another one you can limit by. If there's one particular transaction, you know the number of that transaction, you can search that way. Now, each gift that you record in the system here, let me set this back to January, the entire year here. Every single gift that you record in the system is assigned a unique transaction number. So you'll see that down this column here on this report. So every individual gift gets its own transaction number. So if you happen to know which one you're looking for, you can filter it in that way by using the transaction number fields here. You can also limit by amounts. So if you want to see all of your gifts of $100 to $200, for example, you can do that. And it will show you just all of the gifts will have that amount to them. Okay. All right. So that, again, is your filter tab where you're kind of telling the system what output you want on your report in terms of dates and things along those lines. The Group and Sort tab is the next one we're going to talk about along the top here, which allows you to change the order in which your report prints out. This particular report is sorting by the giver and then grouping by that field. And let's talk about what that all means. If I click on the down arrow, first of all, for sort field, you're going to see a couple of things here: giver, giver number, and giver name. Just giver, when you sort by giver, the way that works is it sorts alphabetically by name, and then it also includes the giver number. So if you got two John Smiths in your database, and one John Smith is giver number 1 and the other John Smith is giver number 2, it'll put them in that particular order. Just sorting by giver name is usually the same thing when you're using that. But you'll also see all of you can sort by whatever you choose to on this screen here: date posted, date date occurred, any of the fields that you can include, you can sort in that manner. So that's that. But then I also want to talk about this group by field checkbox here. If I group by my first sort field, so you'll see giver name is my first sort, and I'm grouping by that field, it looks like this. What that means is if you have multiple entries on your report that share the same giver name, in this case, it groups them together. So you'll see a heading. Here's all of my gifts from Jeffrey Alexander. Here's all of my gifts from Richard Arnold. If you do not group by that, but you still sort in that manner, it looks like this. I won't group by that field, and I'll simply print it. Now there's no header for these transactions. It just shows them each individually, and it's sorted in that same manner. Okay, so that's the difference between the sort field and whether you're grouping by it. The other thing you can do here is notice that there's multiple sorts on this screen. So let's say, for example, I'm not going to sort by giver name. I'm going to sort by date occurred. Donation date, in this case, is what it is called. Now, there are many gifts that are recorded with the same date. So within that donation date, how do we wish to sort it? So then oftentimes you could then, let's do it by transaction number instead of alphabetical. So we're going to group by donation date and print it. So within each date, then it's going by transaction number, which we're actually not displaying on this version of the report. But, oh, actually we are right here in this column. So within each donation date, we're sorting by transaction number. We could also go in there and instead of doing it that way, and this would be the more common way of doing it, is sorting it by giver name, by giver. So now when we print it within each date, it's going to be alphabetical within each date. So you actually have the ability to more thoroughly control kind of how things sort on that. Okay. The next tab is the columns tab. This screen here is where the flexibility of our reports really comes out. On the right side of this screen, underneath where it says visible columns here at the top, you're going to see everything that's displaying on your report right now. But over here on the left side, underneath available columns, is everything that's available to show on this report. And again, this is going to be for all of the different reports and donations. You're going to have options very similar to this. So by this one, we're going to have the giver column, transaction column, etc. If I wanted to add pledge dates, that would show us that an individual gives to a particular giving account, but then it will actually show whether they've pledged to it or not in that little pledged dates section. If I wanted to add this to my report, I would select that column on the left side, and I'd use my arrow button to the right, and it would show up on my visible columns section. If I wanted to change the order in which these appear, I could use my arrow buttons over to the right here. I want this to appear right after account on my report, so I'm going to move it up one slot so it's sitting right there. The other thing you're going to notice here is that there is a width column where you can control how much room, this is approximately how many characters you're allowing in space on your report. So if you print a report, and notice how this report actually carries over to the second page. So we've got this, we've got a giver name column, which we don't want. So we need to get rid of that giver name column. You see that on the second page here. That's unnecessary to show. But also notice things like this pledge column is giving us a lot of additional space we don't need. So we can tighten that up. The giver column is giving us way too much space that we do not need. So we can tighten up our reports by doing this. I'm going to start with selecting giver name, and I'm getting rid of it because it's a duplicate. Click on that arrow to get rid of it. I'm going to take my pledge dates column. It's giving me 35 characters in width here. I'm going to cut that down to 10. Let's make it 15. This giver column is 35 characters in width. You can use these little arrow buttons, tiny little arrow buttons, or you can simply click in there and edit that as well. This is more of an art than a science, usually, when you're adjusting these parameters on your report. Your account, for example, probably doesn't need to be 45 characters in length. I'm going to make that 30. Let's print it again and see how our report looks now. Still not quite enough room. Our amount is still spilled over to the second page. I notice that I still have a lot more room I can cut off of where it says account. So I'm going to make that even smaller. So you see how this is the account column, and we've got all of this extra space. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that down even further. I'm going to cut that down to 15 and take a look at it. So now it's tightened up. You've got everything on the same page. It looks fine now. So a lot of times you're switching back and forth between looking at your print preview and that columns tab until you get it looking how you wish it to look. Okay, so that's all the types of things you can do with the columns tabs. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one, which is our fonts tab. There are 3 sections of your report that you can edit the fonts for. There's a page header, a column headings, and a body text section. So when I look at our print preview here, our page header is this here at the top. Okay. Our column headers are these: giver, transaction number, batch code, this, and then the body of it is the rest is the body text here. So you can adjust any of this. I can go to my body text. I can change it from Times New Roman to Courier, for example. Oop. There it is. I can change my font size. I'll make it a little bigger on 12 when we look at our report again. It changes the number of characters that are each fit in there. So again, even when you're changing that, you may need to kind of play with it until it looks the way you want. I can adjust my column widths if I wanted to, or I can make my font smaller. I'm going to go ahead and make my font smaller. And again, a lot of this stuff is just things that you play with. Okay. All right. Last thing we want to look at on the log report is the report options tab, which is a very simple thing here. When you're looking at a giver name on there, whether you want it to show a bracket V to indicate that they're from the visitor file after their name, and whether you want to show a bracket D to show that they are givers from the donations module. And that just displays with their name when you're looking at your report. Two other tabs that you'll see in a lot of these reports that don't show on the donations log report we want to look at next. I'm going to go to the compare and analyze button, and we're going to look at the pledge/giving analysis report. Whereas the log report is more of a transactional style report, the pledge giving analysis report is more of a demographics type report where you're telling the system, I'm looking for everybody who gave $100 or more during a particular date range. So this one is more you're doing a search based on I want everybody who gave to certain things or gave a certain amount or pledged a certain amount. Okay, so that's what this report does. So because of that, we've got a couple of additional columns that you're going to see in here. For example, a Givers tab. So the Givers tab, in addition to saying search criteria like everybody who gave a particular amount or pledged a particular amount, you can also filter by any of the fields from your membership module. So if I click on my down arrow, these are actually going to be fields from the membership module. So you can do things like find your status field, and I only want to see active members on my report. And then there's a number of other search criteria in here, whether it's folks from the member file or the visitor file, searches based on envelope number, giver number ranges, and things along those lines. So on this particular report, if you want to filter by giving account, that's actually a separate tab. So sometimes you're also going to see a separate tab, and we'll see it here, called Accounts along the top. And this is the one that in general, and in specifically even on this report, it allows you to filter it by either a particular or a set of giving accounts. So I could show my general fund, my missions fund, and my Save the Animals drive, and only show giving on this report that apply to those particular giving accounts. The other thing you can do here is select one of your campaigns you have set up. So our Save the Dogs campaign, if I only wanted to report on folks there, you select that at the top. So that is everything I wanted to show to you. Those are going to be the kinds of options that you're going to have for your various donations accounts to filter and control the output of those accounts. Many of these reports require kind of playing around with them to get the output that you're looking for. But the thing I would say is that once you've got it set up the way that you want it set up, when you print your report, it's going to save your last settings by user. So if you have multiple users who use Church Windows, you can have your own way that you like to look at a particular report in terms of most commonly columns versus other folks. So that's everything I've got for you today, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're all set to go, feel free to click on the X in the upper right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar control panel. That'll exit you out of the room. I will leave the room open for a couple of minutes here if anybody has any last-minute questions. But outside of that, thank you so much for joining me here, everybody. I hope you have a nice afternoon.